Hello, and welcome to
Small Talk about the Big Issue. I'm Lorraine,
And I'm Kiara.
and I'm very excited for this episode because I'm genuinely curious about what we're going to be talking about in this episode. I think now that we've closed the introductory season, if you will, where I feel like I learned so much, but I also had more of an idea going into the research process of the episodes, what kinds of things we'd be discussing.
Yes.
Going into this episode, I had no idea. And I felt like it was particularly motivating to research something that's potentially easily actionable at the individual level.
Yes. I was about to say it's a very personal theme. It's something that we do every single day. And looking into the carbon footprint that we have while doing this is something that's really fascinating because it's something that's actionable on our side, but it's also something we do without thinking about it. And few people realize that this thing we do has a carbon footprint and like some ecological consequences.
Yes, and you're right. We spend, as students and millennials or Gen Z, I don't know which generation we're a part of.
Gen Z.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We're younger than I thought we were. But we spend so much time on electronic devices. And so, this felt kind of close to home and very solution-oriented. So I'm very excited to go into this episode.
You've dropped the word electronic devices because I don't think we introduced it so far.
Oh, okay.
This episode will be about the environmental cost of electronic devices and the way we use them.
Yes. And so in the first part, I'll cover the cost of producing our electronic devices and also of using them.
Yeah. And in the second part, I've chosen a really interesting article that focuses on the carbon footprint of our digital content consumption.
Okay, so diving right into the first section, I'd like to talk about the cost of making electronic devices, so the material side of things, because that's the main overall cost of electronic devices. Okay. So if you think of your phone, 80% of the carbon footprint of your smartphone happens during the manufacturing process. So to make your phone, 16% is down to consumer use, and then the rest is transport.
Okay.
Now this is different for different devices. So, for example, a smartphone is relatively cheap in terms of carbon. It's 58 kilograms of carbon equivalents, but a computer is over 300 kilograms.
Oh yeah, that's a lot.
A TV is almost 900. Now, where do these carbon emissions come from? Mostly from metal extraction, shipping, and production. And so this brings us to the question of what is a smartphone or an electronic device made of? If you think of, the device that's in your hand or in your pocket or on your desk, about half of it is silicone and plastic.
Okay.
So fossil fuel derivatives. But there's also some metal in there. So iron, aluminum, and copper are the most common ones.
Yeah.
But you've also got some really precious stuff in there, like gold and silver.
Really? Okay.
Yes. And so that brings us to the environmental costs of making a smartphone, for example. I don't know. Have you ever seen a metal mine, Kiara?
Not personally, I have to say no.
So I don't think that I have seen a metal mine. And actually, most metal mining activities happen in Brazil or Western Africa, India, and China for the most part. But I have seen rock mine areas, notably in the Alps in southeastern France. I don't know how common of a sight this is for people around the world, but I feel like I've seen quite a few in France.
Yeah.
And they tend to be places that are carved out of mountainsides. So you have a lot of usually very white rock that's exposed. And I've looked up pictures of metal mines, and it's roughly similar.
Oh, is it?
Depending on what you're mining and where, perhaps.
Actually, I can see a mine from my window right now.
Oh, okay.
I'm in the middle of the French countryside, and there's a rock quarry.
Okay, yes, that's
That's one of them, right?
Yeah, and so I think if you look out your window, Kiara, it won't be too difficult to see that, that's a degraded environment, that animals and plants aren't living there.
It's a pile of rocks and dust.
Exactly. And so that's maybe the first obvious cost of extracting anything from the soil is you degrade the environment. And in the event of heavy metals, it can also lead to toxic waste release into the environment, into soils and waters, for example.
Which is very bad for biodiversity.
Exactly. And for humans.
Yeah, for sure.
But, Kiara, maybe if I keep asking you to look out your window.
Yes.
Do you see any machines? Is it close enough that you see machines?
Yeah, I actually do. I see a few machines. There's no trucks today because it's Sunday.
That's my second point, which is mining is a very machinery-intensive process, and so you're using a lot of fossil fuel, oil, to extract these things. And so these are the two main ways in which producing a phone damages the environment, in terms of the local environment and in terms of the carbon that's released using machinery to extract that metal and transporting it, because as I've mentioned, a lot of the metal mining activities are in Brazil, West Africa, India, and China, and a lot of the smartphone facilities are also in Asia. And so in an age where I feel like there's a lot of focus on consuming local.
Our phone is the least local product we consume.
Exactly. And so in that sense, you get an environmental cost of producing a phone. However, this brings us to solutions, which is really exciting to discuss.
Yes.
Because phones can be recycled. And this is a solution that each one of us can tackle. So I don't know about you, Kiara, but at home, there is a drawer full of phones and old electronic devices.
Old computers. Yeah. Oh, we have the same drawer. I think everyone knows that drawer.
But that drawer, as I've mentioned, has gold and silver in it. And valuable, recyclable materials that are stored inside and that we're not repurposing.
Yeah.
So one of the kind of key messages of this episode for me was that we should be recycling our phones. And I looked it up. And depending on where you live, of course, it's quite easy. Around me now, there are many places I could be bringing my phone and old electronic devices to be recycled to.
I doubt a lot of people know about this because you have to do your own research. It's something I wouldn't have known without you telling me.
I didn't either. And so if we tally up not just my family's phones and your family's, there's about 41 million tons of e-waste produced every year.
That is not being recycled and repurposed.
16% is being recycled.
Oh, yeah, that's too small of a fraction.
Yes, and this waste is a function of our behavior. This is something I feel I can easily change. So I know next time I'm going home, I'm going to tackle this jar. And I think from the first part of this episode, the two takeaways for me are that recycling old electronic devices is a must, but also avoiding buying new ones. And so, you know, owning the ones you only really use and need.
Yeah. Trying to make do with your old ones as well, repairing rather than replacing, even though it's still really hard to find options that are more cost efficient. Sometimes it's cheaper to rebuy an entire new phone than to repair the battery or anything, which is something we definitely need to work on as a society.
Yeah, I think so as well. Moving on to the cost of using these devices. So that's, you know, between the production phase and the recycling of it. If I look on a global scale first, the tech industry is responsible for around 5% of global emissions, and it's expected to grow as more people start using the internet. We need more data centers and cloud computing. Now, why is this? And if I try to explain it to myself, basically, there's energy that you use when you're using your phone, say, that you pay for. So when you're charging your phone, for example. But there's also energy that you don't see because you don't pay for it, which is when we will upload this episode to Spotify, Kiara, we will be using Spotify services and storage. And that electricity that allows Spotify to operate, we will be using kind of by proxy. And so that's the second, perhaps harder to see electrical cost of using your electronic device.
Yeah, our electrical footprint.
Exactly. And it's relevant because these data centers and servers are quite energy intensive. So you need a lot of energy to run them. Now, there are two parameters that will affect how much carbon footprint these have. That's the quantity of energy they use, but also what kind of energy they use. So if they're using renewable energies, like windmills and solar panels,
Mm-hmm.
it's not at all the same environmental cost as if they're burning fossil fuels to get their electricity.
Of course. So the place where the data center is located is just as important as how much energy it uses, depending on the energy mix that this country uses for electricity.
Yeah. And so if we look at globally, mobile phone usage releases 580 million tons of CO2 equivalents annually.
That is quite a lot.
Now, this seems like a lot, and it would be great if we could cut them down. But on an individual basis, if I send you one email, Kiara, that's less than 1 gram of carbon emitted. Now, of course, it depends what's inside that email. If it's a huge file, it won't be the same cost.
Of course.
If I'm sending it to 10 other people, it's not the same cost. But generally, our use of electronic devices isn't our most carbon-intensive behavior at all. And so this leads me to, I think, what are 2 critical points is that, one, using electronic devices shouldn't be a cause for alarm or guilt.
Okay.
Like, I don't know, and this is something for the fact check.
Yeah.
So it's like, recently, I found out, and I don't know whether this is true. I should have maybe checked before the episode.
We'll fact check it later.
But I found out, yeah, please stay until the fact check. I found out baking paper is not sustainable because some parts of it cannot be recycled or degraded very easily.
So they end up in the environment and pollute.
Please stay until the fact check. But I think someone told me this. And anyways, I remember the feeling of like, here I was thinking I was, making these home-baked goods and it was really good for me and for the environment, and actually not at all. And, I'm contributing to something that's going to deteriorate the environment unknowingly. And so to me, this episode showed that while there are behaviors that I can take to reduce the carbon impact of my electronic use, proportionally me using the device that I already own emits fairly little. And so the take-home message is that we should focus on having as few devices as we need to use and recycling the ones we no longer use. And if I draw a parallel, using your phone for a year is equivalent to driving 200 kilometers in a mid-sized fuel car.
Oh, wow. So it puts it into perspective. Maybe we should cut our car usage rather than sending less emails.
Exactly. If you had to prioritize thing, I would say take your cars less. However, it's really funny that you mention emails, because the second kind of critical point I wanted to make, I came across this statistic that said that if every adult in the United Kingdom sent 1 less email per day, over 16,000 tons of carbon a year would not be emitted. That would save 16,000 tons of carbon a year, which is equivalent to taking over 3,000 diesel cars off the road.
Wow.
Which is amazing.
It is huge. But, okay, I wonder, because you said a few minutes ago that sending 1 email was the equivalent of releasing 1 gram of CO2. Does that all add up?
I mean, I guess if you scale it to the number of adults in the UK sending 1 less email a day, I don't know exactly how many of us there are, but I think what was really fascinating to me is, yes, my individual action contributes very little. And I think this extends beyond just using electronic devices. I think oftentimes we think, me changing this very small part of my behavior won't make a big difference. But actually, if we manage to coordinate it, it really does make a big difference.
Yeah. Because I think I looked up this morning how many tons of carbon we release.
Wait, collectively, like one person?
Collectively.
That's an interesting statistic.
The most recent statistic I have is from 2021, and it's 36.2 billion metric tons of CO2
per day?
emitted per year. Per year.
Still on the sidetrack. Yes, 16,000 tons isn't a lot, but that's like 1 email. That's like, on an individual level, it's nothing. And we could really use the scraps, it seems like. So, yeah.
For sure. At the same time, it seems like your own individual actions, like they seem so little and so insignificant, but on the scale of a planet, if everyone were to do those simple things, it would actually be a step forward.
Yes. And so there are several ways that we can take that step.
Mm-hmm.
The most important one is to have as few devices as we can and to recycle the ones that we don't use.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it seems that if we try to cut down just a little bit on how much we use our electronic devices, that also has an impact if we all do it.
Yeah. So first priority to reusing instead of rebuying. And then if you can reduce your consumption of electricity that is not carbon free. So if you know that the electricity you use is very heavy on fossil fuels, then maybe it's good to reduce it.
Exactly. I think that's a good summary.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I guess that means it's article time.
Uh-huh.
It will be a little bit repetitive because some facts are very clear, and I think we will reach the same conclusions, but I'll take you through the journey of this article and we'll see if we reach exactly the same conclusions or if they differ a little bit.
Okay.
So the article I've chosen is titled The Environmental Sustainability of Digital Content Consumption, which was published in Nature about a year ago in May 2024. In other words, to rephrase those titles that sometimes sound a bit daunting, well, it focuses on how sustainable it is to scroll through Instagram or to watch videos on YouTube, which I think is a very interesting question, especially for us Gen Zs who kind of grew up with internet as well and barely question our use of it because we're so used to it. This is relevant because around 60% of the global population has access to internet, and this keeps increasing every year. Since 2015, our use of internet has more than quadrupled. And nowadays, the fraction of people who use internet daily spend around 40% of their waking lives on the net, which is a scary statistics. And I was thinking, that is way too much. That's around 7 hours a day. But I think it does take into account everyone who uses internet on a daily basis for their work, for example.
Yeah. I was going to say, if you're working 7 hours and you have to be on your computer for all 7 of them, then that's it right there.
That brings up the average quite a bit. And so you were talking about data centers and their transmission networks, Lorraine, and I found some stats that said that those globally account for 2 to 3% of the global electricity consumption, and that this is also predicted to increase as years go by and our consumption of internet increases as well. So that's why it's very interesting to look at the carbon footprint of our digital content consumption. But there's no study yet on how much your personal internet consumption contributes to your carbon footprint.
Okay.
Which is why this article is the first of its kind and is very interesting. It looks at the carbon footprint, but also at the resource footprint of, as I like to repeat it again, digital content consumption. So I think it's important to now define what I mean by digital content consumption.
I was going to ask, yes.
Yeah, this is the annual use of web surfing, social media, video and music streaming, and video calls. So all of those activities together represent your digital content consumption in this article. Of course, it doesn't take into account right now generative AI, which would be really interesting for another episode. But right now, it only focuses on those 5 main uses of internet that I've mentioned. And okay, I think we're ready to dive into the results already. The first result they found is that your digital content consumption represents, on average, 3 to 4% of your per capita greenhouse gas emissions. So out of all the emissions that you produce yearly as a human through your direct electricity consumption, but also through your lifestyle choices, your activities on internet represent around 3 to 4% of that carbon you spend. It's hard always to interpret these numbers because, again, this is an average, and we like to be really careful on how we interpret numbers we see online. This being an average means that it will be very different depending on where you come from. And where your electricity comes from. For example, in Norway, this number is a lot lower because the country relies a lot on hydropower, which is a green energy source. Whereas in India, a country that relies majorly on fossil fuels, this average greenhouse gas emissions due to digital content consumption will be quite higher.
Okay.
But so now we know the average, 3 to 4% of the carbon you spend is spent on internet, but it doesn't really tell us how sustainable this is. What does it mean? Is this little enough? Is this already too much? Well, to answer this question, we need to define the carrying capacity of our planet, which is something you've probably heard before, and I know I have studying ecology, but it's always good to start on the same scientific basis.
Yes. I think I need a refresher too.
So the carrying capacity of our planet is to what extent our planet can support our needs daily. So how much one person is entitled to use of Earth's resources so that everyone on Earth can still have their fair share.
Ooh, there's a lot to unpack. I feel like we could do multiple episodes on this, and we probably should.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you see it, like for every resource there is on Earth, there's a common global budget. And if we want to stay under 1.5 degrees, everyone has their own specific carbon budget, which is how much carbon one person is entitled to spend without risking to go over 1.5 degrees of global warming. So everyone has their little, piggy bank of carbon that they're allowed to spend on the things they care about. But you have to make sure that you don't spend too much, because if everyone spent as much as you, then you would overshoot the goal of staying below 1.5 degrees of global warming.
And also potentially you using more than your share means someone else has to live off of less than their share.
But as we also said in a previous episode, it's not only because you use more that other people are going to use less. Typically, everyone uses too much. And the reason that we can still sustain it is that we're borrowing from the future. We're using the carbon that we were supposed to use tomorrow and the day after. And at some point, we'll just use up too much that we reach that point of no return of 1.5 degrees of global warming.
Whoa, I love this detour that we're on.
Yeah. So circling back to our carbon budget, this study determined it to be at around 501 kilograms of CO2 per person per year. So going back to what you said, Lorraine, in the beginning of this episode, that a computer, for example, could cost, quotation marks, 300 kilograms of CO2. That's more than half of your carbon budget if you want to stay under 1.5 degrees of warming. And if you remember correctly as well, in a previous episode, we had mentioned a carbon budget of, I think, 1.2 tons of carbon dioxide per person. Now, you might be wondering why that is a different number. Well, the study that I'm referring to right now is more recent. And since then, we have used more carbon dioxide than what we should in order to stay below 1.5 degrees. So the more we overuse our carbon resources, the smaller that budget gets and the less we're entitled to. And so now digital content consumption represents 41% of that carbon budget already, which is way too much.
Especially if you consider maybe that using the internet, while it can be a source of livelihood, it's not like an immediate need. It's not like food or shelter or anything like that.
That was what I was going to go to next, because we need that carbon budget for things like food, transportation, and if we're already using up 41% of it for digital content consumption, sometimes entertainment, also sometimes work, I don't think we'll be able to reconcile it with our basic needs. So there is a very simple solution to that. Maybe let's keep it for the end of this article. I want to first mention something else they looked into. They looked at the carrying capacity of the Earth in terms of materials and minerals, how much we are allowed to use yearly of Earth's minerals. And it found that we are using 55% of that mineral budget for digital content consumption. So the most problematic part is, without a doubt, the devices we use, as you said, Lorraine, because we need to extract raw materials for manufacturing and for distribution, and these are the things that overshoot our mineral and material budget.
Is that material and mineral budget per capita, per person, or for the entire planet?
This is per person, per capita.
Okay.
So on average, owning the phone that you have, the computer that you have, the TV that you have already accounts for 55% of your mineral budget. So that means it leaves little room for a car, for any household electronic supplies like dishwashers or just a stove.
Yeah, and arguably you're also benefiting from a lot of electronics from services you buy, like if you go to a coffee shop or a library or whatever.
Yeah, printers, espresso machines.
Devices that you don't own but that you still benefit from.
The article was very clear about the fact that 55% of our mineral budget was too much for us to spend on our digital content consumption.
Whether or not you include minerals that you're benefiting from, even though you don't own the device.
Yeah. Exactly. What's important to bear in mind now is that by 2050, there's going to be an increase of 25% of people on Earth Do you know what that means, Lorraine?
In terms of number?
In terms of your carbon budget.
It means it's going to decrease because we're going to have to share it with more people.
Exactly. We're going to have the same ecological budget, if not less, but more people to share it with. So our share of Earth's carrying capacity is reduced by 19%. Regardless of the resource you take into account, whether it's carbon, minerals, we will be entitled to 19% less of our Earth's resources if we're meant to share equally with everyone. So this article finds that it's increasingly crucial to, 1, decarbonize the electricity production to mitigate the impacts of your digital content consumption. This is the easy solution to those 41% of carbon emissions that our digital content consumption represents. We need to switch to sustainable green electricity sources.
I feel like this has become really clear over the course of this episode, and I'm sure it's linked to like loads of different aspects of our lives.
Yeah.
But using green energy is so important.
And the second point that this raises is that it is equally crucial to extend the lifetime of our electronic devices to reduce both the mineral and the metal consumption. So I think this kind of goes hand in hand with what you said in the beginning, Lorraine. I feel like both conclusions kind of
reach the same point.
Exactly. So as of now, our consumption of internet is not in line with our sustainability goals. But this can be amended pretty well by switching to green electricity as fast as possible and then heavily reducing our consumption of materials and minerals by extending the lifetime of our electronic devices. And as Lorraine mentioned in the beginning of the episode, by recycling and reusing your old devices as much as you can.
Yes, this was a fascinating episode. I'm walking away with a lot of actionable points that I can take to have a more sustainable digital carbon footprint.
Yeah. And at the same time, to remove a little bit of the guilt linked around your internet use. Knowing that, if you know that you use a renewable energy source for your electricity, then that one email you send has less impact than you think. But also, as you mentioned, Lorraine, it's important to know that even though your own actions seem inconsequent, you have to think on a global scale because we are in a situation that requires global solutions and global changes in behaviors. So it's not easy, like it's too easy to say that my own personal change in behavior will not be enough to have an impact. It's actually the opposite that we need in order to face the crisis.
Yeah, this episode was so interesting.
Yeah.
I expected us to talk about like a very niche aspect of our lives, and in the end we're talking about things that are very far-reaching at an individual level, but also I think it's so well formulated this point that you made that we need to think at a global level because this is a global problem. So interesting.
Well, I think we should keep it at that to not dilute the message. There was one resource that I wanted to mention before we leave.
Yes.
I found this really interesting social carbon footprint calculator, which tells you which social media site has the biggest environmental impact. And you can put in how many minutes a day you spend using YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, even TikTok, Reddit, or LinkedIn, and see how much carbon you release while doing that.
And compare it to your allocated carbon budget of
501 kilograms of CO2
per year, per person.
Yes.
That's a wrap. Thank you for joining us. As usual, please leave us any questions, comments, or feedback either in the comment section of this episode or at our email address, smalltalk.bigissue@gmail.com. Thank you very much.
Stay tuned until next time and have a nice day.
Goodbye.
And now for the much anticipated fact check. While some scientific literature demonstrates the transfer of certain chemicals used to make baking paper onto food, the studies do not highlight any adverse effects on human or environmental health for the doses involved. As context for one of the figures cited by Lorraine, there are over 54 million adults in the United Kingdom. In the article, we would like to clarify that the carbon budget they calculated is 501 kilograms per person per year until 2030. This article was published a year ago, and greenhouse gases emissions have not reduced. They have in fact increased, so our carbon budget is now even lower. And a study shows with great confidence that we will reach and likely overshoot 1.5 degrees of global warming in little over 3 years. Finally, we would like to go over one of our previous episodes following feedback from a listener. In episode 6, Lorraine and I discussed the fact that the loss of species due to climate change triggers the loss of ecosystem services, which in turn exacerbates climate change. So it's a situation where one imbalance leads to many others. We called it a negative feedback loop. In fact, a negative feedback loop is one where effects inhibit one another to reach a stable equilibrium. A more accurate way of describing climate change would be a positive feedback loop with very negative consequences. We're also taking this opportunity to tell you we're very grateful for your feedback, always. It helps us improve the podcast and stay scientifically rigorous. So please write to us for any suggestions, corrections, or questions. That's it for this week. See you next time.